make sure he wasn't
Hello.
at skill level.
Morning. I don't believe that you're going to. I do not believe you're going to spend the next quarter of an hour in the sun. I just don't believe this to be true.
He will. Then he'll win you bitch.
And he's put us in the shade. Are we good to go?
We're good to go.
Audio level, David Crisafulli, testing 1, 2, 3.
Sounds great.
We spent the last couple of days in Redcliffe and it's been an excellent visit, and I want to thank the community for the way that they've hosted us, and we've had a couple of great days, but the highlight was taking the time to go and door knock in the local area, and the entire team did that. Every LNP MP from across the state took the time to go and listen to locals, and their concerns are real. And before I get on to why we're here today, I just wanted to reflect on a couple. I met Eve, who was concerned about the patients tax, and David is joining us today as well, and he'll comment about that. But she has to go to the doctor every few weeks to get her prescriptions, and she's deeply concerned about that and the long-term impacts on it. I met Dave, who's been in the same house for over 20 years, and he spoke to me about the rise in rent that he's had, and he is concerned about the cost of living. And we spoke for some time about that and some of the solutions we're putting on the table. And I met Josh, a 17-year-old young fellow who was on his bike and pulled over and took the time to have a chat. And it was youth crime that was his number one issue. And so it is we are here today. And I want to thank both Ben and Michelle Beaumont for joining us. And I'll hand over to Ben in a moment. But I just want to make the point that we need solutions to the youth crime epidemic gripping this state, and we need them now. Every day we wake to another story about another family whose life is ripped apart, and it can't go on. Every day we hear from a Queenslander who has the vehicle that they rely on to make a livelihood, wake up and it's gone in the morning, and we can't wait for solutions. We have repeatedly said that Parliament must be recalled. We can't wait for the end of the month to debate it. And all the solutions have to be put on the table. And regardless where they come from, if we are serious about dealing with youth crime and we are serious about making Queensland safer, Parliament will be recalled immediately and every solution will be put on the table. Make no mistake, the laws were watered down in 2015. And on the back of it, we have a generation of repeat hardcore youth offenders who know that their rights outweigh the rights of the victim. We are failing on both ends of the spectrum. We need to do more with early intervention, and we also need to make sure that we have laws to deal with those hardcore repeat offenders. And if we don't, well then more families' lives will be torn apart. Ben, I might ask you to say some words, mate.
Morning. I don't have a lot to say. I've pretty much got just a question to ask you. Is the LNP government willing to sit down and meet with the Palaszczuk government and other government parties and victims of crime to collectively come up with a solution to this issue we're having? Because I don't see that happen, and why hasn't it happened already is my question.
The answer is yes. Wherever, whenever the Premier can set the agenda, we'll be there. And
Same.
And I think you should be afforded the opportunity to be at the table. So
I think
yeah.
so. I think it's quite rude that I think it's quite rude that this hasn't happened. I mean, you've got one government who rules it all, but that's quite pig-headed to have that attitude that they must have the final say when there's so many good solutions out there and they're just being ignored. You've got multiple parties coming up with solutions, and this government is quite ignorant to what they're saying.
Look, it's a big issue. It's going to take all hands on deck. I think, we need to come together on this. There is no, I'm right, you're wrong in this situation. This affects our community. It affects your grandparents, your aunts, uncles, children, and so on. As a community, we should see our politicians all getting together on this and putting, a working solution in place.
So,
I think what Palaszczuk and the government offered forward after Lee Lovell lost his beautiful wife, Emma, I think that was, I hate to say the word, it was almost insulting, because anyone who knows the laws or has seen enough of them, and again, we're just, parents, but those laws were nothing more than a knee-jerk reaction. They already mention bail history, you know, at the time of sentencing. We want to see that mentioned through bail, you know, and through the court, the trial itself in front of jurors, and so on. But
so David's answered my question. I guess the next question is, Anastasia Palaszczuk, where are you, and where's the answer to my question?
I think we're all waiting to see some real action. You don't get that position unless you're keen to fulfil, you know, your job requirements and your commitment to the public and our Queensland community. It's, you know, you're not there just for that title. That title, you know, incurs great responsibility to the public you govern over. And to say, look, like, you know, you're going to extend these sentences, it means nothing. Minimum sentencing is where we have to go. And we have to attack this from both ends. There's no, you know, this solution will work without that. We have to come at it from every angle.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was obviously. You're just going to.
Yep, sorry.
Speak to a lot of people who are impacted by this issue quite frequently. Do you find that the minimum sentencing is one thing that really sticks with people, where maximum is one thing, where there's very little faith that they're going to get the maximum, but the minimum is kind of what people want to see this stuff? Well,
as a juvenile killer who's convicted of murder, still can't get the maximum. So what's the point of putting it up to 14 years when you can't get 10? I mean, a minimum would change a lot.
A minimum
but
mandatory.
In saying that, we're not the experts. We're just a family. We're just basic people looking for change, because what the government's doing right now, it's not working, and then there must be a better solution than what they've come up with.
And in that question you ask, you know, there is no point giving, you know, a higher sentence if, you know, like Ben said, you're not going to give that sentence. As the Juvenile Justice Act stands, it states that, you know, every action will be taken to keep these juveniles out of detention, every effort. So the judge is hardly going to go the higher end of that. And, you know, it is that thing that even if he was, say, to give that full sentence of 10 years, 10 years is the most you can get for a murder, for a juvenile killer. Unless it's particularly heinous, they say. But the thing is, it's only 60% of that sentence, then time serves taken off. Angus's killers will be out in 2025, and we're in 2023. That's nothing. That's putting the public back in danger again. That's not sending a message to any other juvenile offender. Sorry, it is sending a message. It's sending the message that we're soft on crime.
I think the problem is there's never going to be minimum sentencing when you've got a legislation which clearly states detention as a last resort, and with concurrent sentencing, it's not going to happen. So unless they change the whole entire act, what they're doing is just smoke and mirrors for the public, because making a maximum, yeah, wow, big deal. Make a minimum, they make that minimum, they must change all the other laws to coincide with it. And it's not happening. They know it. That's why they've just said maximum, because they can't change the minimum. Otherwise, they're going to take away detention as a last resort, which is incredibly
They
insulting.
have to amend the Juvenile Justice Act. It's out of date with what the position we find ourselves in now. It hasn't kept pace with the times. It was wrote in, 1992? Things have changed since then, and we find ourselves at a critical turning point. If we don't take action now, we're going to see our beautiful country, our beautiful state, end up like America. That's where we're heading. Do we really want to be like that? I mean, we can do better. We really can do better. And look, like I said, get in early. I think if you wait till these kids are even 8 years old to intervene, you're almost too late. You've got to start right at the beginning, you know, and there has to be that mandatory minimum sentence, and you have to send a message to let other kids know that, all right, we will help you at the beginning, but there is a line in the sand, and once you cross that, you will have to bear the brunt of your actions, not the public.
You want to move on to the next subject?
I'll get you.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Thank you.
Sorry, mate, we've seen the reports of a specialised task force targeting detail and skint at this stage.
Yeah.
Your reaction to that? Do you think it's another reactionary method?
You can create another body and another name, but in the end there are 12 less police in Queensland than there were 2 years ago, and the laws were watered down. So we're asking them to do a job with one hand tied behind their back. Less of them, weaker laws, and then the government throws its hands up and wonders why the community is less safe. It's not rocket science.
I suppose, do you think this task force was an impressive word they get to roll out?
I just want to see more police, and most Queenslanders would look at the fact that there are 12 less police using the government's own figures than 2 years ago and be aghast at that. And then if you couple that with the fact that legislation was watered down in 2015 to create a generation of repeat young criminals, is it any wonder why our state is in the middle of a youth crime epidemic? Less police, weaker laws, it's a recipe for disaster.
Throwing down, I suppose, the gauntlet to Premier just then to actually have a come together, would you welcome a public forum on that?
Wherever and whenever. And in the end, I think most Queenslanders want to see us work together, and my commitment is to do that absolutely with anybody. And we haven't seen any of the details about the changes that have been flagged, and I think Michelle articulated it pretty clearly about some of the failings. But despite that, we'll go into Parliament with an open mind. I would just like the government to do the same. And I've consistently said we have to rewrite the Act to embed consequences for action, to make breach of bail an offence. And I would love the same maturity from the government as what we're willing to display to them. Because in the end, there are going to be a number of different solutions, and we should all work together to find them. And that's solutions at both ends of the spectrum, including what we are doing at the moment in terms of early intervention isn't working. How can we find a way to turn young people around before they enter their lifetime of crime? Likewise, we have a problem with the here and now, where you have a generation of repeat offenders who know that there are no consequences for actions. So you've got to deal with that as well. And we're failing them at both ends of the spectrum. And I say to the Premier, I'll meet her and anyone else, whenever, wherever, because people like the Beaumonts deserve that. And we should all be open-minded, and we should all be mature and be willing to listen to every solution put on the table.
Just one from overnight, just from down your neck of the woods, we've seen another car stolen down on the Gold Coast, washed on the Pacific motorway, all that happening down in an area where you know quite well. What's your reaction to seeing that? How you see that again?
Well, my reaction to that is one of just disbelief. But my reaction to the Minister's comments when asked this morning was the same, disbelief. The only people who believe that the laws are working are the government ministers who are given the talking notes to parrot about them. There were more cars stolen in December than at any time in Queensland history, and the start to this year has been equally as troubling. The government has to listen to the solutions and to the cries of the community. And another night, another scene of madness, and we are better than that as a state, and it can't go on. You can't continue to see records tumble for all the wrong reasons and the government tell everybody that they're not, things aren't that bad. Well, the lived experience is pretty bad. It's pretty troubling, and it's pretty frustrating when a government won't listen to what normal Queenslanders are saying, and they're saying they've had enough of it. And when a car gets stolen and torched, it's not just the social impacts. There is an economic impact. That person does not have that vehicle to be able to go and earn a crust. That person then has to go through all the rigmarole with insurance, pay an excess, then get Ubers in the meantime before they get a replacement vehicle. There is an economic impact as well as a social one. And at a time when cost of living has never been more important, the need for action on youth crime is so important from so many fronts. Those scenes show a government that is losing control of the war on youth crime, and there have been more car thefts in December than ever before, and 2023 has started in exactly the same vein. And until the laws change, nothing will change. Yeah. I'm mindful that the committee's meeting today. I'll just make the following point, and again, a comment from the Minister this morning. When a state has the ability for a union official to be given secret cabinet documents before a meeting, and then a minister is told how to vote by that union official, that doesn't look a lot like democracy from where Queenslanders are standing. It looks like bully boy tactics. It looks like a government that is owned lock, stock and barrel by a select few. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that's not the case. Well, here's one I prepared earlier. David, over to you.
Thanks, DC. I'll make some comments about the patients tax. So the Palaszczuk government's patient tax has been on the table for months now. And from the very beginning, we were warning of the risks it posed for patients, again, in a cost of living pressured environment. From the very beginning, doctors have been calling it for what it was. It was immoral, it was illogical, it would kill bulk billing. They are the words of doctors, of medical professionals at the front line. From the very beginning, we saw the Treasurer once again prove how he hasn't been listening and how he hasn't been consulting. Back in November, the Treasurer said he would not act because it would be improper for him to do so. He has said politicians don't get involved in tax laws relating to individuals, businesses and partnerships. And so then we see today's reports of what the Treasurer is now proposing for the patients tax. We have seen time and again that this Treasurer simply will not listen and will not consult. This is a political fix, not a fix for patients from a Treasurer who has been embarrassed again. The Treasurer does not listen, he does not consult and cannot be trusted. Medical professionals have been calling for this to be solved for months, and yet it took a potential humiliation at National Cabinet for the Treasurer today to act. We've only seen the reports. We need to delve into the detail and see what will come of this proposal. But the truth is, good governments listen, they consult, they model, they just don't run thought bubbles up the flagpole. That will have devastating impacts on the ability of pensioners, of children, of families to see their doctor. That is not good government, and that is what we'll continue to prosecute with this Treasurer and with the Palaszczuk government's patients tax. Today's announcement is just a short-term political fix, not a fix for patients from a Treasurer who has been embarrassed and humiliated again. Beautiful. Thanks, man.